Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Experiential Realism. I'll be interviewing some interesting people soon to do with lucid dreaming and metaphysics. I'll be talking to lucid dreamer and sleep expert Daniel Love, Professor Philip Clayton about metaphysics, and eventually it'll be a pleasure to interview the father of lucid dreaming research, Dr. Keith Hearn. It's only a shame that we won't be talking about idealism, as Keith is currently writing a book about it, and he doesn't want people stealing his ideas as it's happened before. I wonder how different his views on metaphysical idealism are from people like Donald Hoffman and Bernardo Kastrup. I'm definitely buying his book when it comes out, that's for sure. To those of you who don't know about analytic idealism, by the way, or are under the impression that Kastrup negates science, you need to get acquainted with his literature, particularly science ideated. Kastrup doesn't negate science, as some people out there like to claim, especially materialists. He just has a nuanced interpretation of empirical evidence. Nor does he negate our experience of matter and mathematics itself. Kastrup affirms science but simply looks at the world through idealist metaphysics. There is evidence for the brain acting as a filter for consciousness rather than being its creator. As the physician Larry Dossey put it, we are conscious not because of the brain but in spite of it. If there is no consciousness, nothing can be said to exist, including the abstract concept of maths, which is the scaffolding on which the universe is founded. Before we think that there is matter, we must remember that it is the experience of matter that we have evidence for. Consciousness is experience. You can also have the experience of matter in a dream and wake up to realize that the objects you experienced never had any standalone existence. I would also say that waking life isn't necessarily someone else's dream if you are simultaneously identifying with your human perspective and also being universal consciousness. Consciousness is one phenomenon. You are that field of awareness. Also, it makes no sense to see the world as separate from you because you are part of the world. And as long as you perceive waking life, it is your dream too. You can only be in consciousness because that is exactly what you are, so your stream of experience is continuous. An inconspicuous fallacy that physicalists make is the argumentum ad lapidem, or appeal to the stone fallacy, which, as mentioned before, is usually illustrated by a debate that took place about 300 years ago between Samuel Johnson and George Berkeley. The former tried to refute the latter's subjective idealism by kicking a large stone. It was noted that the same actions and the same sensations that come with kicking a stone can occur in vivid dreams. Therefore, kicking a large stone does not prove in any way that objects have material existence. Now, I don't know what the mind at large feels like or what the perspective of universal consciousness is before the ostensible boundary between individual loci of consciousness and the collective is created. But we can guess before we finally draw our last breath and potentially find out. I've recently come across the concept of hedonium or orgasmium, which is a homogeneous substance with limited consciousness and in a constant state of supreme bliss. Perhaps that is the primordial consciousness, or even what is meant by nirvana, or even parinirvana, which is the ultimate goal for some Buddhists. Whatever the case, I am more convinced by the argument that consciousness is fundamental than I am about strong emergence. As I said before, eliminativism or illusionism is absurd because for one to be mistaken about being conscious, one needs to be conscious in the first place. Eliminativism only serves to reinforce the notion that nothing gets behind consciousness, as Max Planck once stated. I'm not convinced by consciousness emergence or consciousness as a byproduct of unconscious elements at all. How does one go from quantitative matter to qualitative experiences? At what point, under physicalism, does a physical configuration become aware and why? And even if you declare that consciousness doesn't emerge at the classical level of neural networks, but has its roots in quantum mechanics, you are still at a loss to explain why the interaction of unconscious subatomic particles produces a field of awareness and why that field is you and not someone else. Have I touched upon a deep mystery here or what? If, on the other hand, you accept the irreducibility and non-computability of consciousness, you come to realize that it's fundamental and contains all experiences. It's there from the outset and antecedent to quantum physics. It is the ground in which all wave functions and vibrations occur, which gives rise to different flavors of experience. The primordial consciousness, however, is pure awareness, what we are before we become human or adopt the anthropic perspective. This reminds me of the film The Vow, which is based on the true story of Kim and Cricket Carpenter. The couple had been in a car crash and Cricket sustained life-threatening brain injuries. She was in an induced coma for 4 months and woke up with no memory of who she was and didn't even recognise her husband. Slowly but surely, she formed new memories and a new personality. Her new self developed a penchant for bananas, which her former self never liked, and she eventually went on dates with her husband to see if she could fall in love with him again. Note that the core of who she is, that pristine cognition that we all have in common, never changed. What changed is what the awareness identified with, because it formed a new narrative about the self. And like the movie, by the way, real life didn't have a happy ending. The couple split up after 25 years of marriage because the husband was caught cheating. In hindsight, it's as though what happened to Cricket was a forewarning or even a nudge to forget about her husband and start afresh, literally from a blank slate. Anyway, despite losing the memories of her life before the accident, Cricket retained her core consciousness. She never ceased to be that awareness. Strong emergence is nothing but a cop-out, which also begets the problem of epiphenomenalism. Supposedly, out of a complexity of unconscious elements, a physicalist miracle occurs where a witness emerges as a byproduct and apparently has no causal power despite experiencing an illusion of free will in a cause and effect universe. This epiphenomenon ostensibly confers no evolutionary advantage either, because somehow it is only an emergent property and, in theory, the organic conferee could have done everything it did in its lifetime without the light being on. But the untenability of epiphenomenalism is exposed when we come to fathom that the very fact that we are conscious causes us to talk about consciousness, and we only need this example as proof that the very existence of consciousness as a phenomenon can and does influence behaviour, thus having causal power in the physical world. Panpsychism suffers from the combination problem because even though it states that atoms are made of qualia, or even that matter itself is inherently conscious or proto-conscious, whatever this means, it still doesn't explain how the tiniest units of matter put together experiential qualities or what makes that happen. A panpsychist might postulate that quantum entanglement is what causes binding. But if you claim this, then you can't solve the boundary problem because everything is entangled with everything else, except that some things are apparently more entangled than others. But it's essentially a gradient, so there is no hard boundary where you can say that two things are not entangled with each other anymore. So actually everything is a gigantic network of entanglement, so there are no boundaries. Electromagnetism could be said to solve the binding problem, but then the people who suggested it, like Jojo McFadden, lack the extra step of explaining how boundaries are formed. It makes more sense in the idealist model that symmetrical twists or several types of topological segmentation within the universal field of consciousness create or represent a variety of qualia as well as different individual perspectives. Anyway, In spite of its problems, I still think panpsychism has at least taken a step in the right direction and away from the worst untenability, which is reductionist physicalism. I've heard renowned physicalists deny the existence of spirit realms and declare, in the same breath, that nature hides an infinitude of parallel universes which are created every time we are faced with multiple choices, in defence, of course, of Everett's many worlds interpretation of quantum theory. What is crazier? The Swedenborgian claim that a spiritual plane of existence is largely hidden from human view, or the Everettian postulation that multiple universes are created every nanosecond. What sounds more like woo or magic? The idealist view that consciousness is fundamental or the ultimate reality, or the physicalist belief that unconscious matter generates conscious experiences like a lamp producing a genie? How can the complex arrangement of unaware elements give rise to awareness? It can't. Now, what do we have more evidence for? A multiverse or consciousness? About 11 years ago, while in Bognor Regis, I went to the beach and looked at myriad pebbles of different shapes, sizes, colours and forms. I picked up a little pebble and imagined that it was our universe. I also imagined that the properties of the pebble represented the requirements for a universe that is just like ours, with the same laws of physics and capable of generating life. To find another exactly like it meant finding another universe sustaining life. If it differed, even in the slightest, it could not support life. I suddenly realised, in my physicalist fantasy, that I was looking at a sea of lifeless worlds, a vast multiversal waste. I couldn't find another pebble exactly like the one I had picked up, which represented my home universe. Needless to say, I didn't look everywhere, and perhaps there are replicas out there somewhere that I missed. But I did realise two things. The first is that I was getting an Empyrean subliminal feeling inside. The second was that it seemed like there was no room for God if the quantum foam can't help but explore every possibility, because nothingness is impossible. I felt like a godless artist, appreciating nature and capable of profound spiritual states of mind, but with a great respect for science and treasuring my imagination. The same observations that I made in Bognor Regis as a physicalist could also happen under metaphysical idealism, of course. The medium of mind could have given rise to multiple Hubble bubbles, each representing what we'd call a universe. The term mind-boggling almost takes a new literal meaning. But we just don't know. What we do know now, thanks to the James Webb Space Telescope, is that carbon formed much earlier in the universe's history than previously believed, which increases the chances that extraterrestrial life is not rare and allows more time for intelligent civilizations to have formed in the cosmos besides our own. I think it was Robin Hanson who proposed the idea of quiet and loud aliens as a possible solution to the Fermi paradox. Why is the universe eerily quiet? Loud aliens could also be grabby aliens, a concept describing highly advanced invaders who also inhibit the development of other technological civilizations in their sphere of influence. They may already be on their way to us and arrive in 1,000 years or so. Perhaps we might become a grabby civilization after developing interstellar or even intergalactic travel. Who knows? Maybe extraterrestrials are already here. It is also possible that the crews that pilot some of the most extraordinary UFOs, they could be spaceships, who knows, the crews are actually from our planet. Perhaps a race of cryptids hiding in our oceans, or even living in subterranean hideouts, and they come out once in a while to invade our skies. Who says the sky is ours anyway? Maybe they have secret bases on the moon. In all fairness, I don't know what they are. If I knew what they are, they wouldn't be unidentified. In my lifetime, I've seen about 5 UFOs, 2 of which were quite impressive. The most impressive one was almost a decade ago now. Me and my wife were stargazing in front of our former house one night when I noticed what looked like a plane on fire approaching from a distance. It was coming towards the house and I got my wife's attention to it, as I thought it was about to crash. When it got closer and it was quite big in the sky as it flew over our heads, we realised that it wasn't a conventional aircraft. The trail of flames soon merged with the glowing object to form an orangish yellow disc. It was flying faster than an aeroplane, but it was eerily silent, which made no sense because, according to the laws of physics, any supersonic aircraft should make a lot of noise. It has been suggested to me that it might have been a stealth fighter, but I don't know. It wasn't. It couldn't have been a stealth fighter because stealth aircrafts are subsonic. Besides, what me and my wife saw was a circular luminous object in the sky, not a triangular dark mass darting across the night sky. This thing was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It certainly gave me the sense that I was watching something alien, so much so that I had to make sure my wife was seeing what I was seeing. If I had been by myself, I might have thought that I was hallucinating. It was that strange. We had just witnessed a flying saucer practically, and it was almost the size of a full moon as it flew over our heads at low altitude. It soon gained altitude as it flew past our house, and when I pointed at it and said to my wife, "There it goes," the object dimmed its light and became transparent. My wife couldn't see it anymore, but I could. I could still make out a pale circular outline. The object was practically see-through, with wispy clouds going right through it, and it maintained the same speed and made absolutely no noise. I got the sense that it had camouflaged itself and wondered if it was being piloted by some non-human intelligence. I really did. If it was man-made, it must have been a top-secret aircraft, maybe military. The other impressive UFO sighting was more recent and happened on a Christmas Eve. A string of orange, green and red lights flew towards our house, and this time me, my wife and my mother witnessed it. We even joked that it was Santa's sleigh. The object soon stopped just over our heads, remaining motionless and silent in the sky. And we were all like, "Oh my God, what is that?" And then something quite remarkable happened. I clapped and waved at the UFO and it seemed to signal back. One of its lights became really bright, like it was shining a massive yellow spotlight on us. And then it dimmed the light to become the original multicoloured string of lights again, and it silently flew away towards the horizon until it disappeared. What on earth was it? About 4 years ago, in the height of the pandemic, the former head of Israel's Defense Ministry's Space Directorate claimed that our species has been in contact with extraterrestrials from a galactic federation. This is a respected professor and retired general who said the American government has also been in contact with aliens and that President Donald Trump knew about them. Now, I do remember in 2018 President Trump endorsing the creation of a space force and directing the Defense Department to reverse its opposition, but I have no idea why, and I also don't know how much heads of state are privy to state secrets that precede them. I can't help but think about Bill Pullman as President Thomas Whitmore in the film Independence Day. President Whitmore had no idea about aliens and spaceships kept in Area 51. Haim Eshed was director of space programs for the Israel Ministry of Defense for decades and former chair of the Space Committee of the National Council for Research and Development for the Ministry of Science, Technology and Space, and also a member of the steering committee of the Israel Space Agency. Why would he make such an outlandish claim? is highly decorated and has been awarded prizes, including the Israel Defense Prize, which is the highest civilian defense honor in Israel. And he was awarded that for reasons that remain classified, by the way. So, what to make of claims that highly advanced alien species are in contact with Earthlings? Eshed has worked at Unit 81, which is a secret technology unit, which makes me think, what does he know that the majority of us don't? The military scientist Isaac Ben Israel stated that Eshed went too far, but we are reminded here that Haim Eshed is the father of Israel's space capabilities. He has always been well respected, holding a bachelor's degree in electronics engineering. This isn't some lunatic like Alex Jones making crazy conspiracies. It's a highly esteemed figure. Is he lying, or have we been lied to by powerful governments when they claim that no contact with extraterrestrials has ever been made? Have aliens been done experiments on Earth's life forms, including humans, as part of a top secret arrangement or agreement with some of our leaders? What's going on? I've seen strange things in the sky, but I've never seen aliens, ever. I've had the vivid experience of being abducted by little grey men, but I know I was in a sleep paralysis hallucination, sparked by me thinking about Taken, the science fiction series by Steven Spielberg, which I happened to be watching around the same time. My bedroom was engulfed in strobing lights and alien silhouettes circled my bed. Subsequently, I was beamed up by a massive flying saucer hovering above my house. Inside the spaceship, beings with bulbous heads drilled into my stomach, just like the picture. It was a vivid and frightening hallucination, let me tell you. So I have an idea of what abductees, alien abductees, feel like. But I think mine was a hallucination. Or was it? I don't really know. I can't be 100% sure, really. Maybe I was really abducted by aliens and they wanted me to think that it was only a dream influenced by what I'd been watching on TV. What's more likely? What can we claim to be true and real with 100% certainty? Not much. By the way, recently my friend Matt Gray interviewed Patrick Harpur on the Cheltenham and UK Philosophers podcast, and they discuss otherworldly beings and our daimonic reality. They go over the concept of daimons. I highly recommend it. People encounter fairies, gnomes, cryptids, Bigfoot, aliens, and it's a big mystery. It may even be the case that mischievous beings are behind reality and they taunt us with how much we don't know. Perhaps my abduction experience was a product of endogenous DMT. Maybe it was an endogenous experience, or like an experience produced by endogenous psychedelic compounds. Who knows? A few years ago, I read Rick Strassman's book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule, and I found that quite a few of his subjects reported making contact with alien entities while they were tripping on exogenous DMT. One of them in particular found himself in space aboard a spaceship, and strange creatures communicated to him through a robot and told him that they relied on Earthlings taking psychedelics because, according to them, tripping facilitates communication with their world. So, humans tripping facilitates communication with their world. Humans taking psychedelics are a way for them to get in touch with us. I found that extremely weird. Others would trip about strange clowns with large blue eyes, which reminds me of a lucid dream I once had where a couple of jesters appeared to be sentient and were staring at me, which gave me the heebie-jeebies. But nothing as frightening as the recurrent lucid nightmares I used to have as a kid, where naked albino men would come through walls and chase me. Their eyes were similar to those of the royalty characters in a typical deck of cards, and they were extremely malicious. They seemed to thrive on my terror and would grab me and violate me. Sometimes they would press my navel so I wouldn't scream for help. Pressing my navel had the effect of making my voice almost inaudible, reducing my scream to a muffled shrill. In one of those lucid nightmares, I guess they were lucid in the sense that I knew I was asleep and dreaming, but I believed the dream world was a place populated by monsters. So, in one of those nightmares, I wrestled with one of the albino men in a dark room, and he threw me against a wall in frustration. I went through the wall and came upon the living room of my childhood home, where I saw a raven-haired woman holding a child on her lap. I fell upon them from the upper part of the ceiling, of the wall near the ceiling. Subsequently, I woke up in my mum's arms and looked up at her. She had dark hair. I guess that was my very first out-of-body experience, which really confused me as a kid. I always thought they were vivid nightmares. I didn't even know the term lucid dreaming back then, and I struggled with my limited vocabulary to tell my mum about them. I used to say, "Mum, these dreams feel real and these naked men chase me," but my poor mother didn't know what to make of it. I'm still reading Grayson's After and studying Jeffrey Long's NDE paper. As you know, I only look at NDEs as possible glimpses of an afterlife allowed by nature. I'm trying to get a metaphysical picture here about reality. So far, there is plenty of evidence for filtration theory. The brain does not produce consciousness. I came across a woman who had an NDE who was having trouble describing her experience, so she came up with an analogy. Imagine that life on Earth is like navigating through a dark warehouse with a dim torchlight. The objects you focus on with your dim light aren't even clear and you have no idea what the warehouse is like. But one day, someone switches on all the lights in the warehouse and everything becomes crystal clear and you see colours and details that you've never seen before. This is the NDE mode. You see how everything is connected, your awareness has expanded, and you see that you have the potential to go beyond the warehouse. Then you return to dark warehouse mode, which is analogous to being your little human self again, and you struggle to explain to other people holding dim lights what it's like to experience a well-illuminated warehouse. It's hard. And on top of that, you are disappointed with being back to seeing less, knowing less and being less, and yet you know there is more by virtue of remembering your enlightening experience. The woman in question expressed her frustration to her mother and sister. Once back in her body, she thought, "Oh no, I'm a limited human brain again." And she told her family how disappointed she was with being just a person on Earth again, in her words. They thought she was going mad. She remembered her experience well, except that some revelations about reality she was told by a loving light that she would not be able to recall. She remembers this telepathic communication, and she remembers that she suddenly knew everything, but once back in her body and identifying with a little limited brain, that wholesome knowledge did not fit. So she was left with just a vague epiphany about that revelation, besides the clear memory of experiencing a larger reality, vibrant realms, and being more than human. She also said language is very poor in conveying what it was like. The noetic quality of her mystical experience also refers to a sense of revelation. I see many people struggle with describing where they go. It's like they left Plato's cave and returned to tell us about the outside world. They sound crazy, but perhaps they don't sound so crazy to philosophical idealists. Once I found idealism more compelling and I came across Donald Hoffman's multimodal user interface theory and the Darien-Phagin theory of consciousness, I realised that nature allowed for an afterlife. So I worried about dead people. What kind of continued experience did they have once their physical bodies ceased to function and decomposed? My new paradigm also forced me to reassess some dreams and lucid dreams I had where my deceased stepfather visited me. Before he died, he said if there is an afterlife, he would do everything he could to communicate that to me once he passed away. I also found Bernardo Kastrup in this journey with idealism and eventually came across Dr. Parnia and cases where NDE or RED patients, RED being recalled experiences of death, so where RED patients read doctors' thoughts whilst apparently out of their bodies. So I decided that NDEs, REDs, provide the best glimpse of what comes after death. And if the afterlife is how the majority describe it, I envy the dead. I really do. And the message from encountered deceased loved ones is all good. I have also experienced a profound blissful stillness once through meditation, and I wonder if NDEs have a component of that. When I mentioned this experience to Professor James Tartaglia, he reckoned I experienced a kind of henosis described by Plotinus, where thoughts cease and primordial unity is apprehended. We unite with the one or monad, and the culmination of henosis is deification. My experience, however, was ephemeral, but even so, it was profound, and some might say that that is enough to realise the spark of divinity in all of us. Henosis. I wasn't even aware of what this Neo-Platonic term entailed until James Tartaglia riffed on it. It is also an important concept in mysticism. According to Plotinus, it's a profound tabula rasa or blank slate, where we may merge with the uncaused. In that absolute simplicity, ego dissolution occurs and one identifies with the monad, and the monad contains all and is also absolutely everything, which is a panentheistic view. Henosis is thus an experience of singularity, and I guess the culmination of henosis would be theosis, which is deification, or identifying with God or divine consciousness. The term kenosis, which is similar to henosis, is somewhat more obscure. It means the act of emptying, which theologians tend to attribute to what Jesus did in order to become entirely receptive to divine will, thereby jettisoning desires. A kind of Christian enlightenment, which is very similar to what the Buddha is purported to have achieved. My new idealist paradigm makes me feel like I have to tentatively reinterpret things I've been exposed to when I was a materialist. For example, when I watched a documentary about Jeffrey Dahmer, I thought that nothing good could come from what he did, and I still maintain that it shouldn't take a serial killer to motivate a whole community to make progressive changes. But strangely enough, Dahmer's evil doing exposed widespread discrimination and corruption in the police force at the time. Then there was Dahmer's strange conversion to Christianity in prison, and the eerie coincidence, one might say, of a schizophrenic inmate killing him and claiming that God told him to do it. As a materialist at the time, I just thought that it was poetic justice. But now, as an idealist, I find myself considering other possibilities. I recall that a lot of people at the time were extremely riled up at seeing Dahmer converting to Christianity on TV. What if the schizophrenic inmate, with his unusual brain, tapped into the collective thoughts of the community wishing the serial killer dead, and interpreted that as God wishing the death of Dharma? Or perhaps Jung's collective unconscious, which is Kastrup's mind at large, decided that Dharma had served its purpose. Perhaps it was a lesson to everyone, which in a way provided impetus for change. This view makes it saliently clear that our world is severely characterized by imperfection, and it's a teleological one if an underlying force aims towards order out of all the chaos. Of course, Dharma was a monstrous psychopath, but we can certainly feel sorry for the child he once was, who didn't have a great start. He certainly wasn't socialised before the age of 4 like most kids. Plus, he developed an unhealthy fascination with the innards of dead animals, an urge that he definitely didn't choose. Life is obviously more complex than the simplified black and white stories that we tend to tell ourselves. Sometimes it takes chaos and destruction to emphasize the need to create order, a new improved order. If we care about safer communities, then we need to have in mind all the things that could go wrong so we can prevent them. People weren't prepared for Jeffrey Dahmer, and he shouldn't have got away with as much as he did, where several people were victimized and murdered, which exposed police incompetence and prejudice against gay people. There is something quite profound and Jungian that my friend Aurora Dawn posted on the Goddess of 10,000 Names Facebook group. And it goes like this. Why darkness, you ask? The darkness protects you, my love. You bury the pieces of yourself too frightening to face, bury them in the night and fog, until you are ready to face them. So you don't ever have to bear what you cannot yet bear, or feel what you are not yet ready to feel. It's intelligent, this burial. But then you forget that the underworld is only made of abandoned pieces of you. You forget that you were the one who put the pieces there. It was your own creation, the monstrous hell realm, the devils and the dragons. Those lost and frightened fragments are forever longing to return to you. The darkness seeks you. It will haunt you, stalk you, follow you wherever you go. You cannot run, for it is all you, all the abandoned pieces of your great and ancient heart, all needing help, longing for integration, crying out for inclusion in a bigger self. I promise you, in the depths of your most terrible despair and loneliness, in the bulging eyes of the most hideous monster chasing you, if you stop and turn to face it and just look hard enough, when you are ready, and not a moment before, if you just look hard enough and through the eyes of love, you will see yourself. Not death there, but life. Not destruction, but absolute safety. You will see your own kind eyes smiling back at you, a safe place within the trauma. Your salvation lies in the darkness, you see, and its salvation lies within you. You are one. You always were. No separation. Nothing to fear but the loss of all fear. Let the darkness have you, my love. Breathe into its sacred core, give it what it cries for, and you will feel the most extraordinary power, know the most blinding light. Why darkness, you ask? So you are protected from your own immense power until you are ready. And Aurora attributes the quote to Jeff Foster, a former astrophysicist who taught non-duality, spirituality, and authored a book called Life Without a Center. Experiencing darkness can put things into perspective and emphasize the light. I read George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia about 10 years ago now. In the book, Orwell describes his days fighting alongside Trotskyists during the Spanish Civil War. I couldn't help but admire the socialism that was prevalent in their unit, a far cry from the Stalinism they were opposed to. There were no superiors amongst sergeants and recruits, but the conditions they had to endure were extremely unpleasant. At 3,000 feet above sea level, the air was often misty, freezing, and sometimes turbulent. They practically had no artillery, and as I read the book, I began to understand why General Franco and his army of fascists won. Orwell's unit often floundered in the dark. Also, men had the terrible habit of defecating in the trenches, but it was safer and more comfortable. So imagine the mission of avoiding shit. Then there were the rats and mice that were unusually found together and stealing their food. Hard times. But Orwell made a good point when he said that people fuss too much about dirt and become surprisingly tolerant and used to it in times of war. And I am also reminded of a Tibetan proverb which says that the secret to living well and longer is eat half, walk double, laugh triple, and love without measure. I also see many people valuing unimportant things in life and dismissing what truly counts. Just watch a season of Married at First Sight and you will know what I mean. The candidates all profess to value personality over looks, all claiming to be the antithesis of a shallow person, thus claiming to be ideal. But it's a different story when they meet their brides and grooms for the first time, especially when they are not exactly eye candy. But as F. Scott Fitzgerald once put it, she was beautiful, but not like those girls in the magazines. She was beautiful for the way she thought. She was beautiful for the sparkle in her eyes and when she talked about something she loved. She was beautiful for her ability to make other people smile, even if she was sad. No, she wasn't beautiful for something as temporary as her looks. She was beautiful deep down to her soul. But it's surprising how many people can fall for the whims and charms of former President Donald Trump, for example. There is a cult surrounding the personality of Trump. Despite the fact that Trump is totally malevolent and a habitual liar, like every other politician anyway, he has what President Joe Biden doesn't have: charisma. Trump is also perceived as being a strong leader, and other heads of state feared his unpredictability. Remember that as soon as Biden rose to power, the Taliban dared to take over Afghanistan, Vladimir Putin dared to invade Ukraine, China dared to invade Taiwanese airspace, and Hamas decided to break a ceasefire and attack Israel. It is all a global chess game based on appearances and impressions. Trump, in terms of foreign policy, is ostensibly better than Biden. The problem is that Trump is also bad, and it comes he's bad when it comes to issues about climate change and abortion laws in America. Roe v. Wade was overturned because of him. As a result, Trump will speed up the end of the world as we know it with the promotion of oil and coal industries, unless he changes, of course. Perhaps America should have gone for Bernie Sanders when they had the chance, as he was the only candidate to fund his campaign with the help of small donors instead of powerful corporations with their ulterior motives that have their interests met before the rest of the population and have a hold on heads of state. In the States, presidential candidates are beholden to them once they reach the Oval Office and feel obligated to fulfill a kind of contract, and they are sure to remind the new administration in the White House with lobbyists who ring up Congress and apply pressure. It's not the best system. It's not a fair system, I don't think. Anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked by American politics, but it just goes to show that there are many influences in the world which are not ideal or fair. If you want a decent leader, it shouldn't matter what he looks like, what he sounds like, or how funny he is. In spite of his sociopathy and narcissism, what matters is how he plans to lead the country, and if he or she is intelligent enough to solve problems. In a similar vein, if you want to get married or are looking for a long-term partner, personality and moral values are paramount. And it's what's inside that counts. Just like that Mighty Boosh song, it's not the peel, it's the orange. I think monistic idealism could potentially bring people closer together. If everyone understands that it is all one mind, that consciousness is really one phenomenon, we might be prompted to be kinder to one another. It is all one mind. Oneness. We may differ as human beings and individuals and may change, we may differ as human beings and individuals may change in the course of time, but consciousness, that irreducible awareness, is unchanging. People may lose mental faculties as human beings when their brains malfunction or become damaged in some way, but the medium of mind never goes away. It's the very fabric of reality. A distinction is to be made here between mind and mental faculties. The mental faculties that we are familiar with are what the mind does as a complex life form, such as a human being. In the case of people like Phineas Gage, whose left frontal lobe was destroyed by a large iron rod driven through his skull, thereby changing his personality, and even Cricket Carpenter, whose head injuries took away memories of herself and her husband, they lost something that their personal minds were doing, but the core consciousness never went away. If we imagine the medium of mind as a still, flat membrane, we can posit that stillness is experienced because it minds itself. If the mind tries to conceptualize that stillness, it begins to do so by becoming other than its original state. So it moves. It is no longer still. But the thing that can be still and also has the potential to move in an infinite number of ways never ceases. It's eternal. Movement is thought, and thoughts produce conceptual realities. This is metaphysical idealism. Though the mind is now fluctuating in its flat membrane, as it were, is now exhibiting peaks and troughs, where some crests are higher than others and some areas are likewise more sunken than others, the mind remembers its original state, and it is also one of its many states. And where it is still, it is also pregnant with infinite potential for movement. Turbulence and unrest points to stillness and vice versa, like a dragon chasing its tail and chasing its own head, like the Ouroboros. Mental faculties are what the mind does, and the mind can be much more than a human being. But even though we can make a distinction between the unchanging and eternal medium of mind and its ephemeral activities within a spatial-temporal framework, we can still realize that there is only mind. There is only one substance, as it were. The universal mind moves and waves in myriad ways to produce differentiation and the illusion of diversity, but just like many branches can be part of the same tree, the plethora of forms in existence are part of the same formless one. It is all the same essence. It is one whole. Everything leads to the same eternal source. It's monistic idealism. When we watch a film, we observe movement and interaction, but the screen never changes. It remains blissfully still and unconcerned. As human beings, we may become concerned about many things and find some events unfair. We label what we experience in this world as good and bad, but if we realize that it is just the universal mind of which we are a part and the whole simultaneously doing its own thing, we wouldn't be so judgmental. It is all for the sake of exploring infinite ways of experiencing. This is experiential realism. Why would the universal mind judge itself for moving in certain ways, for occupying the infinite, for being itself, for being the absolute? The judging it does is relative to what it becomes when it embodies the finite, when it identifies with concepts, when it believes it is a finite creature such as a human being. The universal mind is omniscient. It knows everything because it is everything. It includes all experiences in consciousness. It's pan-experiential. It senses its infinite potential. It is complete. And it is perfect because it contains expressions of imperfection, such as this world. It expresses chaos, entropy, and also what humans regard as order. One might say that chaos is a kind of order. We are judging reality and regarding an endless spectrum based on what it means to us through the lens of a narrow perspective. The human experience of the rest. That's what we get at the moment. The human experience of the rest. Which isn't much. It's a very narrow, constricted view. And the human experience, the human perspective, isn't simple. When my friend Ninny Castle posted something about intuitional feeding and said, I eat everything when I'm hungry, she made me realise that things are not that simple when it comes to my mind or anybody else's mind. All it takes is to probe a little deeper. So I ended up elaborating that my intuition tells me to eat in moderation and reminds me that my eyes are bigger than my belly. My curiosity wants me to try everything. My ego tells me to slow down, lest I end up looking like a meatball to others, and reminds me that some guys have six-packs. Another part of me tells me that I can find anything funny, including instances when I'm silly, and tells me not to take things too seriously. And then sometimes I become aware of something neutral within me, which is inviting but frightening. A little devil tells me to not care about consequences, to worry later. Then there's the antithesis that urges me to refrain from temptations, to be organised and consider cause and effect. It also works in tandem with my ego. My mind is a wonderful mess of conflicting urges and trains of thought. It really is a circus which is best appreciated when I observe it in meditation. I also know that I have the ability to take refuge in the inner sanctum, that is, that stillness of mind. But it doesn't come easily. But then again, I also don't chase it. Anything can be interesting about the mind, even turmoil. I can either cry about the pain of getting a tattoo, or I can enjoy learning about how my body feels when the needle pricks certain areas. I can't really say that I enjoyed the aliens sticking a needle through my belly button. But if it happened again, perhaps I could bring myself to find equanimity in that situation. An exploratory attitude without judgment can enable us to enjoy different flavours of consciousness, like an ice cream, and even pain isn't judged as negative, but is allowed to exist in its own right. It's like going from "I'm in pain" to "there is pain." It's also a kind of feeling. And this way we can also become more receptive to intuition and communication or information input from the mind at large. In my conversation with Robert Waggoner about lucid dreaming, we mentioned Ed Kellogg's Dreamatarian diet. Kellogg was guided by an intelligence behind his dreams which helped him to eat healthily, a diet tailor-made for him. And this intelligence, which I suspect was an onirically represented intuition, was quite prescient. It recommended dark chocolate before it became officially considered as a health food, before anybody even knew that cocoa flavonoids can reduce blood pressure and lower the rate of decline of cognitive ability, including memory. By the way, this is something that you can explore for yourself if you have trouble trusting what other people claim to have achieved. I recommend that you watch that conversation between me and Robert Waggoner if you are interested in knowing thyself through lucid dreaming and communicating with that awareness behind the dream world. In fact, to those of you interested in this, I would urge you to explore, to do your own oniric and mental exploration in general. If there is one thing I learned from Daniel Love, a sleep expert that I hope to interview sometime soon, is that you shouldn't trust every Tom, Dick and Harry. Love actually urges us and urges people, everyone, to be particularly distrustful of those who promise omnilucidity for a good sum of money. You don't need to take any courses. You can start your own practice and increase your chances of having a lucid dream. That's all. Beware of people who also offer mediumship and tarot readings. There are many con artists out there doing cold and hot reading and astutely taking advantage of the Barnum effect. There are many charlatans out there giving spirituality a bad name. But just because there are many liars out there claiming to be doing the extraordinary, it doesn't mean that extraordinary things don't happen or that paranormal events never take place. This is just like Sam Bankman-Fried, the crypto fella who endorsed effective altruism and turned out to be a con man. It's important to remember, however, that just because con men are seen to endorse effective altruism doesn't mean that said moral philosophy is invalid. We mustn't let con artists give great boons a bad name. In a similar vein, we mustn't let charlatans give spirituality a bad name. Just because they approve of spirituality and mediumship doesn't mean that such things aren't real or that they are not worth thinking about. But yeah, don't send anyone any money or don't trust anyone so readily. I haven't trusted anyone like that over the years, as I've always had an inquisitive mind, a skeptical nature, and decided to find out for myself and do my own exploration and practice based on the fact that I trust my experiences and follow my reasoning. As I said before, my own mind, obviously I'm going to resonate with other people. If what they're saying sounds like they're making sense and resonates with my experience, then I'll take on board what they're saying, people like Kastrup and Hoffman. But as I said before, my own mind is the only thing that I can be sure of with 100% certainty, and even then I must be aware of delusion and confirmation bias. But I can honestly say that a long journey of exploration has led me to conclude that materialism is false and consciousness is the ultimate reality. And you don't have to take at face value what seems to make more sense to me at present. Do your own exploring, and you might find that perhaps I overlooked some things. Distrust every human mammal, as Christopher Hitchens used to say. Discretion is the better part of valour. It is my journey that led me to make my own assessments and conclusions as far as I can tell. You don't have to accept any metaphysics I proffer or any anecdotal evidence to do with synchronicity or even meditative states. Speaking of synchronicity, and crypto people, by the way, I recently went to a Biblionico tour presentation at a hotel as I invested in some Aratus gold, and I spoke to one of the heads who, funnily enough, told me that he follows the philosophy of Hermes Trismegistus. I thought it was a weird coincidence because I hardly ever bring up idealism in social situations, as I prefer to leave that to experiential realism and the Facebook groups I frequent also. His name is David Ingham, and I might interview him at some point. He proceeded to tell me that we all have God inside us, that we are part of a higher consciousness, and that we are already perfect, saying that what you think you become, which is similar to what the Buddha said. David also tells himself every day that he is a harmonious being, and he recommended a book called The Master Key System by Charles F. Harnell, a new thought philosopher. My friend Nini already got the book, and I've been reading it on audio. It is a self-help book, so some of you might not like it, but it's worth checking out if you're an ambitious person looking for success or looking to fulfill your dreams. It emphasizes the power of the mind and holds the principle of mentalism, just like the Kabbalion by the three initiates. Excuse me. Anyway, meeting David Ingham made me think that it's not every day that you meet an idealist. I also thought of Hermetic idealism, Stephen Wallard, and I mentioned him to David. And this is where it gets weird, interesting. When he showed me a picture of Harnell's book on his phone, I looked at the time on the screen and saw 22:22, so 22 past 10, a mirror number sync, which, as an angel number, whether you believe it or not, indicates that one is on the right path to balance and harmony, and to be clear on what one wants and co-create with the universe, which is the central theme of the book you were showing me. So that was really strange. The number can also be a sign that you are capable of manifesting your dreams and desires. And again, it's the theme of the self-help book. Anyway, you don't have to believe in angels. You don't even have to believe that the concept has any utility. But people do experience encounters with apparently otherworldly beings. It has been suggested that the angels and demons of antiquity are now called aliens, cryptids, and extraterrestrials. Again, Patrick Harpur, who recently spoke with my friend Matt Gray on the Cheltenham and UK Philosophers podcast, brings our attention to a daimonic reality where he suggests that the almost mischievous absurdity of quantum mechanics is potentially an expression of mischief by these mythological little creatures who remain out of sight for the most part, like little rascals behind reality who can taunt us and confuse us just when we think we have it all sussed out. There are many reports of fairies and gnomes being sighted, Even some UFOs and aliens have their way of challenging what we think we understand about reality. UFOs in particular can appear to defy the laws of physics, as though their pilots are reminding us that we are still primitive. I do think myths and the stories we tell ourselves are mostly psychological. Myths are stories that about psychological archetypes, but also about things we don't yet understand. We have myths about how thunder is created, such as Thor, when we knew less about physics. But sometimes that we concoct myths about the truly insoluble and ineffable. Even NDEs can be interpreted through a religious lens or a secular lens. Some people say that during their mystical experiences on the verge of death, they were accompanied by angels. Others say they had guides with them. Others still are more descriptive and say they were accompanied by beings of light. As regards NDE, it is important to consider the evidence that goes beyond the merely subjective and contains elements that can be objectively confirmed by others. Near-death experiences have described encountering deceased loved ones that they were not aware had died at the time of their NDEs. One example published by the Doctor of Medicine Elizabeth Kubler-Ross involves a Native American woman who was hit by a car and died a few minutes later by the road. But before she died, she told a stranger who stopped to help her, "If you ever get near the Indian reservation, please tell my mother that I was okay. Not only okay, but very happy because I am already with my dad." The stranger drove to the Indian reservation where the victim's mother told him that her husband, the victim's father, died of a coronary 700 miles away 1 hour before the car accident. Another NDE recorded by the Near Death Experience Research Foundation involves Sandy, who was 5 years old when she nearly died of encephalitis. This is how she described what happened to her. Another smaller beautiful light joined us. The light was a girl about 10 years old that looked somewhat like me. She recognized me. We hugged and she said, "I am your sister. I was named after our grandmother Willamette, who died 1 month before I was born. Our parents called me Willie for short. They were waiting to tell you about me later when our parents felt that you were ready. We talked without words. It seemed strange looking back on it, but it was natural at the time." As she kissed me on the head, I felt her warmth and love. She said, "You need to go back now, Sandy." I was shocked as my next door neighbour and dear friend Glenn formed and shouted, "Sandy, go home. Go home now." He said it with such authority that I quit crying and was back in my body instantly. Later, a day after I went into hospital, I was told that our neighbour Glenn had died from a sudden heart attack. I drew a picture of my angel sister who greeted me and described all she said. My parents were shocked and had a horrified look. They got up and left the room. After a while they returned. They confirmed that they lost a daughter named Willie. Willie died of accidental poisoning about 1 year before I was born. They had decided not to tell my brother and me until we better understood what life and death were about. As you can see from Sandy's NDE, a family friend that she was not aware had died was encountered. And she also met her sister who had died before she was born, and she didn't know about any of this. This is strong evidence that NDEs really are providing awareness of an afterlife. There is a vast compilation of NDEs which include the awareness of deceased people not known to be dead at the time of the experiences. Dr. Bruce Grayson calls them peak in Darien cases. In my talk with Robert Waggoner at about 45 minutes into the conversation, he actually mentions peak in Darien as a term used by Dr. Grayson. Peak in Darien is a metaphor for the experience of seeing a deceased person. The metaphor compares the surprise of encountering the vast Pacific Ocean to the surprise of seeing a deceased person. The Irish writer Francis Power Cobb authored an essay titled The Peak in Darien, The Riddle of Death, about 100 years before I was born. In the essay, Cobb discusses the possibility of communicating with the dead and the idea that a dying person may be a forerunner on the hilltop, as she put it. The Peak in Darien experience doesn't just include NDEs. It's a bit of an umbrella term that also includes deathbed visions and also experiences like the one the aforementioned Native American woman surely had. The peak in Darien experience is a particular kind of deathbed vision, which may be part of an NDE also, which specifically refers to seeing the apparition of someone who has died, but whose death is unknown to the experiencer. In other words, it describes gazing into the afterlife and inexplicably seeing someone that you believe to still be alive, only to find out later that the person has indeed died. The term peak in Darien actually comes from an 1816 poem by John Keats called On First Looking into Chapman's Homer, which goes like this. Much have I travelled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, which bards in fealty to Apollo hold. Oft of one wide expanse had I been told, that deep-browed Homer ruled as his domain. Yet did I never breathe its pure serene, till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. Then felt I like some watcher of the skies, when a new planet swims into his ken, or like stout Cortez, when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent upon a peak in Darien. The peak in Darien is, of course, a steep promontory in Arthur Ransom's Swallows and Amazons, located in Lake District. In the context of NDEs and other related experiences, Dr. Grayson had this to say. Such cases cannot easily be explained as hallucinations based on expectation. In fact, the experiencer is usually quite surprised and sometimes puzzled by the vision of someone thought to be alive. In some of these cases, the appearance of the vision suggests strong motivation on the part of the deceased individual to communicate a message. As such, these peak in Darien cases provide some of the most persuasive evidence for the ontological reality of deceased spirits. Before I go, let me leave you with a poem called The Afterlife by Billy Collins. While you are preparing for sleep, brushing your teeth, or rifling through a magazine in bed, the dead of the day are setting out on their journey. They are moving off in all imaginable directions, each according to his own private belief, and this is the secret that silent Lazarus would not reveal, that everyone is right, as it turns out. You go to the place you always thought you would go, the place you kept lit in an alcove in your head. Some are being shot up a funnel of flashing colours into a zone of light, white as a January sun. Others are standing naked before a forbidding judge who sits with a golden ladder on one side, a coal chute on the other. Some have already joined the celestial choir and are singing as if they have been doing this forever, while the less inventive find themselves stuck in a big air-conditioned room full of food and chorus girls. Some are approaching the department of the female god, a woman in her 40s with short wiry hair and glasses hanging from her neck by a string. With one eye she regards the dead through a hole in her door. There are those who are squeezing into the bodies of animals, eagles and leopards, and the one trying on the skin of a monkey like a tight suit, ready to begin another life in a more simple key, while others float off into some benign vagueness, little units of energy heading for the ultimate elsewhere. I hope you enjoyed this soliloquy, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Experiential Realism if you haven't done so already. Until next time, and take care.